Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. First of all, full disclosure, I do not know how to do this intro without sounding like a complete goober, so bear with me. But this is another form review from a player who found their way to me through the disc golf form check page on the Facebooks. This is continuing the goal of specifically increasing female representation on the channel, because let's face it, like, this is totally a male-dominated sport, and that's not my favorite. Like, I want to make sure that female players feel welcome and included and encouraged to bomb harder than the guys. So let's get on it. This is Nicole. She's throwing about 250 right now. She has a lot of power in her throw. You can see that specifically in the low body. There's a lot of power there. And I feel like if we can just harness it a little better, then more of it will go into the disc. So that's kind of our overarching goal for this review. She said she feels pretty comfortable with standstills and one steps, and is getting some input that she might get better results with a walk up. I understand that viewpoint, and I disagree. I think the vast majority of players, like 75%, including myself, would be better off in terms of their score if they didn't do a walk-up. Like, one, your walk-up doesn't add that much power, and two, it definitely screws up a lot of things. So if you're not solid on your one-steps and your standstills, and if your swing plane isn't solid, adding a walk-up is just going to make everything worse. Like, that's the hardest pill to swallow, and I get it. Like, I don't throw as many standstills as I should because it's fun to do a walk-up, and I'm kind of stuck in that, habit. But I think, honestly, we'd all be better off if we just didn't, until we really had some basics figured out. So that's that. Nicole also said that her miss is most commonly up, either nose up or just up, and also right and or right. Very common. So we'll look at what in the swing plane and the brace is causing that. So I'll just play through so everyone can have some context. So looking at a one step. And there's that power. Look at the hop off of the front foot. Lots of power in the legs, but not enough of it is getting to the disc yet. Okay, so what do we see in this throw? First thing is, I just did a review for myself. It's not on the channel yet. It may not end up on the channel because it's too embarrassing. But I was doing the same thing Nicole is doing here. So the rear hip is turning backwards a little bit. Let me grab a draw tool real quick. So the rear hip is turning instead of just loading backwards. So this hip is now pointing that way, and this hip is pointing that way because the hips are connected. I don't know if you knew that. But what I would rather see is this hip staying pointed that way. Is that true? No, that's not true, because, well, I mean, yeah, no, it is. It's a very, like, gray area thing of what's too much. But see how the foot is pointed this way and the hip is like a little bit off from it, and there's going to be a little bit, but in this case we end up with a little too much. So there's kind of a collapse in the hip in a way, the same way that we talk about collapsing the front shoulder. There's a little bit of collapse in the hip here. So what this does is, because the hips have kind of turned too far backwards in a way, the shoulders have done the same thing. Because we've turned too far back, we've over coiled onto the rear side, then we end up, I mean, I don't even want to say that there's over rotation in the front, but there's like too much rotation happening too early. So that's kind of part of where the front foot hop comes from. Yeah, so you can think about it like there's too much coil, too much energy wound up in the backside of the throw. So that energy normally would come out the front of the brace, but since Nicole has such a powerful lower body, she's redirecting that force up, and it's turning into a hop. Right, so she's not bleeding force out the front of the brace; she's bleeding force upwards. Less common, but it does happen. But pretty clearly, there's energy being directed up that we would ideally want to go into the disc. So we'll talk about how to fix that. We can actually see it better on the side view, so we'll loop back to that one. The other issue that we can see from here is classic elbow orientation rounding, which literally every player in the world struggles with. You can either struggle with it or you can find a way to harness it and use it to your advantage. But first, let's flatten the swing plane and find a way to stop struggling with it, and then we can use it to our advantage later. So what I mean by elbow orientation is the elbow is currently set to hinge on that axis, right? So if Nicole were to bend her elbow, the disc would come up. How to do this? So here's the elbow. Yeah. So here, right? If you bend the elbow, it comes up towards your face. And we want the upper arm to end up out here so that when the elbow bends, it comes back towards the rear shoulder, right? You can thank the graphics department for those fine animations. But hopefully that makes the elbow orientation thing a little more clear. So moving forward here, because of the plane the elbow is oriented on, where it is set to hinge, where it's set to bend, as the arm bends, as the elbow is driven forward, the elbow goes down, right? So working on the assumption that the axis of rotation is the spine, which it may or may not be due to what type of throw we're going for and how well we're executing it. So this is the length of the lever currently, because the spine is the center of rotation, and the point that we're hinging the elbow from is right there, right? So if we get the elbow up here, matching the shoulder tilt, then the lever is longer, right? By 4 to 6 inches in this case, right? This distance right here. So we want the elbow up, out, and away. One, because it puts the elbow hinging on the shoulder plane. And two, because it makes the lever from which we're applying force longer, right? So there's just more power available if you have your elbow up, out, and away from your body. Easy to say, very hard to do. So that's the second issue I see from this angle. And then pop into the other video. Yes, got it. Okay, so here, just something to be aware of, given that the misses tend to be high and right. Nicole, you're sighting on 12 o'clock here, and that's fine. Like, I do the same thing. Almost everybody does the same thing. But that is not actually where you want your hand to let go of the disc. And let's fast forward and see you. And you're not doing that, which is good. But just conceptually, I want to try to make everyone aware that your release isn't at 12 o'clock. So where you sight is not where you physically release the disc in three-dimensional space, right? So being aware of that can help you not drift into releasing at 12. I say this because if you release at 12, your miss will tend to be right? So I'll go, I don't want to spend too much time on that because that's kind of more of an advanced thing, but I want to make you aware of it, and we'll loop back to it a little bit in demo mode. So sighting, and then the big thing we can see in this video that we can see better because of the side view is the posture in the reach back. this is kind of peak reach back, and we have a significant spine lean. So there's, and this is a containment issue again. So there's a ton of rearward extension, which is good, which feels powerful, but we've lost some containment here because the rear foot slipped out. So we'll prove it. So as we go into the reach back, boop. So I don't know how degrees work, but that's at least like 30 degrees, right? So that's pretty significant. So the toe slipping back makes the knee go back, makes the hip go back farther than we wanted it to. Remember, we saw that on the other view. And then the spine lean puts the weight, too many lines. The spine lean puts the weight over the rear foot, which, you know, that's good, but we want this weight. That was not how lines work. We want this weight to be over the rear foot, not just the toes, the nose over the toes, excuse me. So we don't want that to be posture, right? We want this to be posture. And when we keep everything in line, then the rear hip will be pointing at the camera still where we want it. So we do want to coil, we do want to get this rearward extension, but we don't want to spin everything out to get there, because then we're going to have to spin everything forward too much to get back, right? So containment on the rear side to help containment on the front side specifically. So that's that part. We'll move back to that in demo mode and make that a little more clear. And the next thing that we see here is, again, the elbow orientation issues. So see how the elbow goes down below the swing plane? And this is like a hard thing to see with perspective. But the shoulders, so presumably we're setting up for a relatively flat shot given the shoulders. Shoulders are flat in the reach back, so that's another issue, but we would want to be on more of a hyzer, and we'll have to get there to make the changes we want to make with the brace, but don't want to overload my coaching session. So the arm is setting up for a nice hyzer, but the shoulders are not on hyzer yet, which means the hips are probably not on hyzer yet. So the elbow is well below the swing plane at this point, which means now if we look at the disc, see that little bit of flare up? So it's not that the disc is moving, the disc is flat here. And as the elbow goes down, the disc flares up. So elbow goes down, disc starts right there, scooping up. And then we have that for our nose angle, which ends up being a problem because it reflects around the center point. And now we have the opposite. So we have a scoop, right? And we knew that was going to happen because of the elbow orientation, right? So the fix here is to get the elbow up, out, and away and hinging on the swing plane that we want to release on. Then that scoop will go away. Then some of our wobble will go away. Then our nose up trajectory will go away. Maybe. We'll be a significant step closer, at least. So yeah, that's that, right? We can go over that in demo mode as well. And then the next thing is looking at the brace as a whole. So, and again, if you just try to fix the front leg, it's not going to work, right? You always have to fix a step or two or three before you have the issue, because I guarantee that's where it's coming from. So the spin out of the rear foot spins out the rear knee a little bit, spins out the hip a little bit. And then we know as human shapes that we want to keep nose over toes, but that introduces a postural lean. The postural lean turns into, you don't come too far out the front. Yeah, you're redirecting up, right? So I have to keep myself honest on that one. So, but here, the easiest way to understand this is because you are loading your rear leg this much, right? So here your leg isn't really loaded. It's just kind of supporting. But then as you come into your brace, you're loading that leg more. So your quad is taking more load. Because you load up your rear leg so much, it has to unload. And when it unloads, it's going to unload that way with an up force, right? We do not want an up force from our rear leg. We do want an up force from our front leg, but if we have two ups, then we get up. So we want a down force in our hips and an up force from our front leg. You do this part very well. Your front leg does a very nice job of being active. That's why you go up in your brace. But this leg is adding too much up. So you have two ups instead of a down and an up that cancel. So you get a jump or a hop instead of your hip staying in place. Again, if that doesn't track yet, we'll go over it in demo mode and it should be more clear. So your rear leg loads a little too much, I would say. So we're spending too much time and too much weight on this foot and not getting off of it soon enough, or sending the hips forward of it too much. Kind of two ways to look at it. But because your front leg loads so well, because your rear leg loads so well, your front leg also loads well. Like, see that? Back it up. So you're loading into this front leg really nicely. It's really good. The knee is bent, and then boom, the knee starts to unbend very powerfully. Bam, and you get to like, it's all the way locked out. Like, yeah, you're losing your ground contact here, but you have the right motion in your front leg. Most players don't get that for a very long time. Most players don't get that ever. So because your rear leg loads so much, your front leg loads really well, but then you have the rear leg extending too much and sending your hips up. And then when your front leg extends, it should just be sending the front hip up, but it ends up sending both hips up, and you get that big hop. And some of your rotation actually happens in the air. So the fix to that is just not loading the rear leg so that it can't do what we don't want it to do. So here, if you don't let this weight settle as much on that foot, then it won't be able to drive that hip up. So that's the only part we want to cancel, is we don't want the rear leg to drive the hips upwards. The rest of it is great. So if you can balance, get some momentum in the hips going down into the brace instead of the rear leg extending the hip up, then you'll be in very good shape. Okay, got a little bit of a lighting situation going on here, so let me fix that real quick. Maybe, or I could destroy everything. That would also work. Okay, lighting situation fixed. Human mode engaging. Human. Hey. Okay, so what are we going over? Everything. So first, hip turn. So this, right, stick of learning. So this hip is pointed that way. When I load my rear leg, right, so here I have an offset. We might want to add more offset, by the way. Boom, that would probably be helpful. But first, bigger picture stuff. So this hip, when I coil into my rear hip, I do not want this to move a whole bunch, right? So I don't want my foot to spin out, first of all, because then I lose containment. But even keeping my foot there, I can do this and turn my hip too much. I do this in my throw currently. I'm still working on this. So, but you don't want to be here. It makes your knee feel funny, and it makes you tend to over rotate forward, right? You may not get too far forward, but you're gonna rotate in the wrong tempo. I don't know how to explain it, but you want this hip to just go backwards, right? So it still turns a little bit because I'm not a robot, but it's like 15 degrees, not 45 degrees, right? So like grab a stick and work on just getting this back here where it just moves a little bit. Definitely make sure your foot doesn't spin out. and make sure you're not over rotating too much. So that's the first thing, is just make sure you're not spinning out foot or hip. And again, this is getting more containment. So that will also go in with, if you keep that shape here, it's hard to overload and overextend your rear leg, right? When you get here, now it's easy for my hips to go forward, my head to tip over. Now my posture is kind of screwed up. This is where it's very easy for you to extend off of that rear leg, which is what's getting the hip up motion in your throw. So you have an up and then an up, and then everything goes up, right? So you want a float or a neutral or a down, and then an up. So that's gonna look more like, but you're doing a one step. So it's gonna look more like, rather than turning to here, you're gonna stay pretty much sideways. You're gonna keep the knee in, you're gonna keep the hip neutral, and it's just gonna be like that. Boom. Right? So now I don't have any up coming from this leg. I just have a little bit of, maybe a little bit of lift and drop. So I have that's the down force in my hips. That is then canceled by this leg extending exactly like you're doing. You don't have to change your front leg at all. Then this is gonna extend, and then this hip is gonna go down and this hip is gonna go up, right? Boom. So that's gonna fix your power from the lower body. Then we also have the elbow orientation issue. If you get those two things figured out, you got 300, no problem. Promise. So it's that simple. Just keep this turned towards the camera, lift and drop. That's it. So that's we kind of skipped ahead to the brace stuff because it relates very much to the rear rotational containment. So then let's pop upstairs to the elbow orientation thing. So you do not have a bad scoop. It's like just 2 inches, but that's enough, to kind of make the disc want to go up. So from behind, so I'm throwing this way, when you reach back here, the disc is going to scoop. Like, you have really good elbow drive, you're driving your elbow forward into a nice intermediate level pocket, right? If you wanted to push this out to 350, you would probably need to make the disc go from here to center chest or even to the right. And I can get you drills on that when we get to that point, but let's not go crazy yet. First fix the swing plane issue, and then we can work on adding more power to it. But all you need is, rather than your reach back coming from here to here, which is going to keep your elbow bending on that plane, try starting your reach back here. So you're going to come from here. Let me check. What do you actually do on your reach back? Because I tend to think that people will play however their reach back happens, they'll just rewind that motion to get to their pocket. So if you swing the disc down, you don't. A little bit. Yeah, so see how your elbow is dropping? Yes, your elbow is dropping below the plane on your reach back, and then that's how it's going to come forward to your pocket, right? So rather than you sight and then you come down through this shape where your elbow is lower than your shoulders and then up to your reach back, that puts you on this orientation. If you instead sight, come to your power pocket with your elbow up, out, and away, and then come back, now you're in the orientation we want, right? We want this, where the disc stays on the plane. We do not want this, where the disc will come up, right? So sight, pocket, elbow up, out, and away, reach back, elbow up, out, and away, pocket, elbow up, out, and away, hit, right? Well, hit, right? We talked about that, not 12, but 10. But you're doing that part right. Yeah, so that's that. The only reason your disc flares up is because your elbow is bending on the wrong plane. And the only reason the disc goes up is because that elbow down reflects into elbow up, and I get a lift, right? So cranking the elbow up, out and away, disc stays flat, disc stays flat. Then the nose up will go away if you get that right. The misses right are potentially a different thing, which is rounding related, but it's that'll help. The elbow orientation will help both of them. Then we may have to look at getting your hit aggressively at 10 next time we check in. So that's the nose issue, and then the brace stuff. We basically already covered the brace stuff. Yeah, as long as, see, there's the lighting situation again. As long as we get that rear leg contained the way that we want to, then making me look bad. As long as we get the rear leg contained, I think the brace will be fine going forward, right? Okay, there we go. So the only reason you're having issues with the brace, again, front leg looks very good, is the spin out and the lean. So those both go away if we just keep this foot here. So don't let the foot spin out on the reach back. Don't let the hip spin out on the reach back. Just keep those both on 90. You can do a little lift if you want to. So I'm lifting, I'm turning everything except my femur, right? I'm not turning my femur. I'm turning my pelvis on top of my femur. So the hip is staying here, but everything else can start to coil a little bit. And then I can step down and throw from there. All right, it's looking real good. I think that stuff will clean it up pretty nicely. So give that all a try, and then let it settle for, you know, a week or two, and then film another clip and send it back to me, and we'll see where you're at. All right, thank you so much for getting me the clips, and we'll see you next time.